We're going to make a mala today, and first thing we need to know is that this 0 bead is where your tassel is going to go, or your big crystal. Then from the number 1 all the way up through 40, and then you're going to go down to 14, and then these last 2 beads are going to be the beads that are in the very back. So those last 2 beads there are going to be these last 2 beads here. And the way this goes when you start to string it, I'll show you in just a minute. It's going up, down, then you connect over to this bead, then you're going to go back up, and then all the way to back to number 1. And I'll show you how to string it, I'll show you how to tie knots, and then I'll show you how to attach the bottom bead. So to string the bead, you're going to find what number of threads you're going to need. And this is determined, well, first of all, you could see there'll be a number on your thread. But the size that you need is going to be determined by the size, you can't see it there, but the size hole by millimeters. So depending on what size hole you have is going to let you know what size bead to get. You're just going to string every single bead. And this takes me, after I've been doing malas for, I guess it's been 7 years now. It usually takes me about 30 minutes to get all the beads strung on. And then it's going to take me about another 30 to 45 minutes to tie the knots. So when I get to the knots section, I'll show you how to tie those, because that is really what is the hardest and what takes the most amount of practice. When I've taught live classes, this part is always, somebody always messes up on this part. So I'm going to overemphasize that once you get down the first side, you are going to take the last bead, which would be number 14, and then again you're going to pick up number 14 here and start adding the beads, stringing the beads on from the bottom up to the top, and then around the mala board again like that. Once you have all your beads on, you are going to slide those beads all the way down to the bottom of your string. Well, not all the way down, because you don't want them to fall off. So I'm going to tie a knot, leaving myself maybe 4 inches of string, so that whenever I get ready to attach the bead, I have enough string to play with, to attach. And then this is the part that is super challenging. It really is. It takes a long time to get it down, so don't feel, you know, be easy on yourself. It took me, I was probably knotting a mala in 4 hours when I first started, and I mentioned that it's down to 30 minutes to 45 minutes, but it took me 4 hours. Probably for the first 2 months I was making malas, and over time I got faster with it. So once you got one knot, you want to push your next bead as close as you can. Let me do this slow. So I take my 2 fingers, I make the knot, and then I push the bead through, and I have that loop open, and I slide the string down, keeping the knot as close as possible to the bead. And then once I've got it pretty close, I take this little tool, grab the string, and push the knot down. So during the knotting process, the whole mala making can be a ritual. And so you would set the space up like you would any other ritual. And then during the knot tying, you would be tying prayers into the knot. So it might be a mantra that you're using. It might be an affirmation that you're using. It might be a prayer. So basically, as you tie the knot, you're tying either the mantra, the affirmation, or the prayer into the knot. Maybe you recite those words out loud. Or maybe you're just saying them quietly inside your mind, or maybe you're not saying anything at all. It's really up to you. The other thing I wanted to mention is that if you're not making some specific pattern, you don't need this bead board. The bead board is basically just to keep you on track with your pattern. So here's something I recently did, and you could see that I would not be able to do this without the bead board to keep me on track with the pattern that I'm making. But if you're just using one bead, maybe you're going to use sandalwood, or maybe you're going to use the rudraksha seeds, then you don't need to use the board. You're just going to count 108 beads. You can lie them all down in a straight row and string the beads onto your string, and then just start tying your knots. I really recommend using some sort of a tool to push the knot down close to the bead, because just with your bare fingers, you won't be able to get the knot so tight, and you will not be able to get the knot so close to the other bead. So you definitely want to find this tool here I found to be the most useful. What does it say? Stainless steel. Yeah, I'm not really sure what you would call this little thing, but they have them at the bead store. I think I might have paid like $2 for this thing. So that's that. This will take you a while. Every time I've taught classes with people in person, it's very frustrating the first time you do it. Your knots will not be close to the bead. I can show you a way to untie the knot. I don't want to. It's very annoying, but it's very annoying when it happens. I'll just do it. Say you don't get your knot close enough. This happens all the time. You see the knot isn't so close to the bead. So what you would do is, I will usually grab two tools. One is going to be to hold on to one side of the knot. The other one is going to be to hold the opposite side of the knot, and then you're just going to work your way to untying it. Of course, I didn't make that knot so tight because you can be, sometimes it takes 20 minutes to get a knot out, and it's really not fun. And I've gotten knots so tight before that I can get them out, and I've had to undo all the knots that I've did and start over again. So you really want to be careful to get your knot as close as possible to your bead. Okay, so there you go. That's the basics of how to make prayer beads. One last thing. When you're going to attach the bottom bead, or if you're using a tassel, you're going to have your mala beads all knotted up. They're going to be, let's see, something like this. You'll have your whole mala beads knotted up, and then you'll have these two ends at the bottom that are left over. So with these two ends, what you're going to do, here, let me show you on a different mala that's not the one I'm working on. I'm just going to imagine that is these two. You're going to take your crystal. I'm just going to grab one. Hopefully it has, it's drilled on both sides. If it's not drilled, you're going to have to do a wire wrapping. And a lot of people just use tassels. The tassels are super easy to attach. I don't use tassels, and I don't have any to show you, but it's the easiest part of making the mala. It's self-explanatory. So you're just going to thread from either side. That's imagining that this thing is full of beads. Then you're going to thread this through the opposite side. And once you do that, you're going to have these two tails. You're going to pull them up all the way, and there you go, it catches. So what I normally do, once I have some sort of a catch, I'll just tie knots on either side. So you tie the knot there, you tie the knot there, and then once the knots are tied, I usually use a little dab of super glue on both of the knots. And I am a little bit obsessive about my knots, so I usually will put 2 or 3 knots and then apply a little dab of super glue just to make sure that it stays on. And you can see on my mala, the one I've been using, I really went crazy and put a whole, like, just knots over knots over knots over knots. So I like to do this because it's not going to fall off. And if it does eventually, the knots do eventually, the whole point of a mala is to use it. Eventually these knots do come thin and they will break. And from what I learned, when the mala breaks, that means that you have finished whatever it was you were praying for, or whatever your practice that you were doing. It's actually seen as a something to celebrate when your mala breaks. So me personally, if you buy a mala from me, I will always repair your mala for a very low price. Usually it's going to be like $30 or something like that. And that's always guaranteed. Otherwise, you can learn how to tie the knots yourself, which I highly recommend because it's a really great practice. It's really meditative, and you can make it into a ritual, and it's really beautiful to learn how to do. So thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that you will practice making prayer beads.